So, hey, everybody, welcome again to eChannelNews. We've got Jay McBain, and we're going to talk about life in 2024 and what it's going to be like in 2025. Hey, Jay, welcome, man. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks. Just back from some travel. How are you doing?
Very, very good. Yeah, so I saw Michelle is getting a bit of a checkup this morning, and I think she took a picture, I believe, keeping the
Absolutely.
health in check for
Yep, yep.
sure.
Family's doing well.
Good stuff for sure. So let's talk. Let's start maybe there, Bali. So I've never been there. First of all, how was it?
I love Bali. We went on vacation one time, and going on business is different. It's like being in Cleveland. You fly into the airport, you take a taxi, you stay in the hotel, you get back to the airport and go home. Other than having an ocean out there outside your hotel room, it might as well have been any other conference, which is disappointing. But it was our APAC event that we run
Mm,
every year now for many, many years, and it
mm.
pulls together over 1,000 of the most senior partners. Distributors and vendors at a pretty executive level, mostly CEOs of the biggest partners in the region.
Good stuff. Well, let's talk about Canalys and your events. So I think you did three this year, I believe, if I remember correctly. So a European one, the one you just did, and an American one.
Yeah,
Uh,
we move them around the world and we move them around the regions. So this year in Europe, that event's been going on for pretty close to 20 years.
mm,
And it's the biggest channel event in Europe every year. Again, bringing in, kind of all of the top channel chiefs, the top partner executives and distributors from the region. This year was Berlin.
mm.
Last year was Barcelona. We had one in the US in Miami, hometown for me. Last year was in Palm Springs. But again, the idea is to bring in top executives. There's a lot of great events, and I know you run many, many of them across the channel and cybersecurity and things like that. And this one was set up just to be kind of top down, Davos type event
Mm.
where you're trying to get, senior and CEOs of some of the Fortune 100 and Fortune 500 vendors, to come speak on stage and things. And, the captains of industry dinner that goes on before is kind of the collection of many billionaires in this industry who, sit around and kind of discuss the year that was and the
Mm.
year that we're going into.
So, what are some of the highlights? I was able to catch the one, I believe, in Palm Springs last year. But so, what happened this year? Like, what was the takeaways? What did you feel that the channel community learned? What they're doing right, what they're doing wrong? What those headwinds and tailwinds.
Yeah, I think the biggest story of the year is this move to platforms. We
Mm.
walk through it, and you and I walk through it in cybersecurity
Yeah.
as 6,500 different vendors started to coalesce and form around, larger platforms. And it's happened, and partners would recognize the hyperscalers, AWS, Microsoft, and Google. They would recognize platforms across SaaS companies like Salesforce and ServiceNow and Workday, Marketo, NetSuite, HubSpot. We're starting to recognize a platform economy
Mm.
and how platforms work different than kind of linear channel models that we've had at the past, kind of two-tier models based on gold, silver, bronze programs. Just a few weeks ago, for example, Cisco moved out of gold, silver, bronze. They're now in a point system,
Mm.
much like what Microsoft did 2.5 years ago, and then VMware and HP. And one by one, the biggest vendors in the world are starting to recognize partners for what they actually do more than just a cash register. And interestingly enough, a couple of weeks ago, we did surveys around the world, over 500 partners in a survey. And they came back, and the number one thing they want vendors to measure them now is non-transactional activities. All the 28 moments that go up to the point of sale. And then every 30 days forever in a subscription, consumption, now Gen AI kind of pricing models. There's so much work that goes on through the entire customer journey. And for 43 years now, we just paid out and recognized the point of sale. And with the growth of marketplaces, kind of with the growth of the new buyer, the growth of platforms, it's understanding that how you deliver outcomes and how you work on this team that surrounds the customer. And now partners are asking for this recognition and asking for incentives
Mm.
that go far beyond just collecting the customer's money.
Yeah, and rightly so. I mean, hell, it's not just the person who collects a check, right? There's a lot of moving parts, right, to get up to that speed. One of the things that we're getting dependent, obviously, right, in these platforms and these solutions. It's almost unbelievable to think of a world without them now. And then you hear a lot of. I've been talking with a lot of people in the grid about how it's not quite up to speed. Um, we talk about data centers as well about there's just not a lot of folks, not a lot of states or provinces that actually want them anymore because they suck so much juice, electricity out of the population. What's your thought about? I mean, is this really sustainable? Like how sustainable is it? Do you think?
It's not.
Mm,
The three hyperscalers this year, just the top three, use more energy and emit more carbon into the atmosphere than the airline industry.
mm,
So just talking about the hyperscalers alone. When you look at our industry overall, a lot of the commitments that were made on sustainability back in 2022, 2023, kind of before the generative AI era kicked off last March, at least the
mm,
consumer trend part of it kicked off last March. Most of the major companies have kind of silently walked back their commitments
mm,
on climate. The 2030, the 2040, the 2050 commitments have kind of been walked back because generative AI, just as an example, if you were to query ChatGPT, for a simple thing,
mm,
even, who won the football game last night,
mm,
as opposed to asking Google, it takes 866% more energy, more fresh water, more electricity to do it through ChatGPT than through just a Google search. And so that's just, simple queries, but you can imagine, on a spreadsheet when you go and ask ChatGPT to go do 10,000 things. And as our
mm,
co-pilot starts working on our shoulder, reading our emails, listening to our phone calls, sitting on this, recording right now and, kind of participating in our lives, you can imagine the energies going through the roof to the point where this year, all of the major hyperscalers are talking nuclear and buying up nuclear and asking governments for nuclear help, in terms of being able to fuel this next generation of technology. So yes, sustainability ought to come to the front. And, based on 45% of the world's population this year went to elections,
mm.
in most cases, including the United States, they voted kind of against more climate, more sustainability, and things like that. So we're going to go through a very interesting time in the next number of years as we kind of, on one side, start
Mm,
consuming infinitely more power. We've already got protests in Latin America where there's not enough fresh water to drink
mm,
because the data center is consuming, the town's water.
mm,
Got obviously electricity, being limited in many cases, and that's in the United States,
mm,
where big data centers are being limited by the local power utilities. And so we're here now, and the exponential growth, infinite growth of compute, storage, networking that's going to drive this next era is going to bring this to the front.
mm. I really think it's for me personally, I think it's the biggest story that's there is a sustainability aspect. I've been speaking to folks at companies trying, in the sustainability world, and I can tell you they're just not getting the attention, right?
Yeah.
Um, I spoke to someone who's trying to automate a little bit better the grid because apparently when you look at the grid, it's like a zillions of engineers flipping switches and adjusting, load balancing and whatever else they do. And it's just not sustainable. He also said that the engineers are sort of not well trained moving forward. And so there's a massive glut there, and they're not quite sure how they're going to keep those lights on type thing.
Yeah, there's an interesting story. I just spent time with Schneider Electric,
Yeah.
their partner event and partner councils. And Time Magazine put them on the cover this year as the world's most sustainable company. Happens to
Hmm.
be a tech company, but all of the data centers, and not just hyperscalers, all of the colos, the Equinix centers, and all the co-hosting and everything in the middle, and obviously all the data centers at the edge, the ones we've been running since the 60s
Hmm.
with IBM mainframes, and obviously through the PC server era, through the 80s, to 2000, and we even have 59% of companies today repatriating some of its
Mm.
cloud activity back to the edge.
Yeah.
But think of the power companies. So that's Schneider Electric, that's Eaton, that's Vertiv.
Mm.
That's where the electricity plug and the water spigot, comes into a data center, whether it's at the edge or in the cloud. And it's interesting to calling one of those companies the most sustainable in the world. And I think about, all of the different places where compute, storage, and service is going to happen. The networking is going to happen. I think about the topology because we're coming up on the 2-year mark now of generative AI as
Mm.
a consumer trend, but now obviously the next generation of technology. But the one thing we learned in 2024 is what the topology is actually going to look like. So we know that 83% of the world's business data sits on premises.
Mm.
It is on those old IBM mainframes, the EMC storage racks. It is your relationship with your bank, with your airline, with your government, sits on those old storage racks that have been
Mm.
around decades and decades and decades. Those have not been, put down into a data lake, indexed, inferred, trained, tuned into data lakes. That's the promise in the next 10 years of generative AI. But suffice it to say that every one of those data centers, doesn't matter where those servers are, has this conduit for electricity and water. And I think these companies are going to have a much bigger role to play in the next 20 years. And the metering of all this, we can ask companies themselves to say, hey, how much are you using? Which might be challenging, but what if, government regulators, for example, stepped into those three companies, which probably have 90 something percent share among them, and made them, report publicly
Mm.
every data center, whether it's, in the public cloud or a small little data center at the edge, but had this, visible thing where we could connect carbon credits and we could connect, maybe carbon taxation if you happen to be Canadian,
Mm.
into these conversations. And this is where it might get more interesting.
Don't get me started on that, my friend. So now we have Elon Musk taking care of the regulations over in the U.S. and we got the carbon tax up here. There's a lot of things that's sort of clashing in a way, and I just feel that we're now in the next battle of this energy crisis, and I'm not quite sure how it's going to all play out. It's if I listen to those folks in that world, it just
Yep.
says we don't have enough. It's and you can't say, Scotty, I need more power, Scotty. There is no power left to get, right? But I don't want to spend.
I'll correct you again. Half the
Okay.
world's population,
Mhm.
almost 4 billion people, went to elections this year.
Yeah.
And in most cases around the world, including the United States, over half the population voted the other way.
Yeah.
So this is going through a period politically
Mm.
that's going to be interesting as well. And the Trump slash Musk presidency, we don't even mention the vice president anymore because we know that Musk got elected along with Trump, is going to create a lot of chaos. It probably is going to turn into opportunity for the tech industry, which already is forecasted to outgrow all the other 26 major industries. And not only in 2025, but probably for the next decade. So all of the, generative AI and all of this modern, kind of business transformation is around technology, which it has been for, at least 20 years and will continue to be. This next turn of the crank, this next generation where we went
Mm.
20 years client server, we went 20 years cloud, and now we're kind of tipping off the next 20 years. Again, is a tech industry story as all of us in every job in every place in the world get slightly better with our new
Mm.
co-pilots.
It definitely seems that the tech industry is just on fire, right? And it's there's sort of no like a bullet train coming down, and it's just no stopping it for sure. When so if we zoom out a little bit in the channel a little bit, let's talk maybe switch from sustainability to the channel. The reality for the channel is that they're growing well. They're growing at pretty decent margins. It's almost like you don't really have to have much skills anymore. So you can spin up an MSP very, very quickly these days. What's your take on what's happening in the channel as well?
Well, I think it's trifurcated. It's not as easy to say as all boats are rising.
Mm.
We continue to hear from service leadership, for example, who is monitoring thousands of P&Ls.
Mhm.
We're hearing from others who, dig deep into the financials that somewhere between 25 to 30% of partners are not, making money on a predictable and reliable, repeatable
Mhm.
basis. And that's, a pretty big chunk for an industry that's outgrowing other industries. The world economy this year, 2024, will grow at 2.6%.
Mhm.
Tech industry will grow at 6.2%. But think of managed service providers, which the managed services industry next year at $610 billion is
Mhm.
growing at 12%.
Mhm.
99% of them are in cybersecurity, which is also growing double digits.
Mhm.
And it's interesting. Cyber products are growing at 10. Cyber services are growing at close to 13. Managed security services are growing at 15. So I'm in a business that's growing at 12. 99% of them are in cyber, which is growing at, for them, should be 15, managed security. And an industry, that's growing double or triple what the industry is. And to say that, 25 to 30% haven't found a way to be reliably profitable, would say that there are some,
Mhm.
things that need to be done, in terms of raising all boats.
Mhm.
While on the other side, the amount of roll-ups and private equity and everything else that's absolutely, streaming into this industry is creating some super winners
Mhm.
and generating a lot of cash, buying a lot of yachts for a lot of rich people, kind of behind
Mhm.
private equity and things like that. So this is kind of a trifurcated kind of story.
Mhm.
You have kind of the good, the better, and the best.
For the group that's, I guess, struggling, let's say, for lack of a better word, right? Um, I mean, they shouldn't be, right? I mean, the opportunity is so much, right? I mean, it's adding security today to your game is not difficult because you can outsource these things, right?
Mhm.
I speak to like hundreds of these cybersecurity companies, and they all want to offer an outsource option. Some of them are baking in things that in the past was just not even considerable, like insurance. So use my MDR and you automatically get insurance to do this and that and the other. So there is no lack of opportunity. What do you think is wrong with those folks? If there's something wrong with them, are they not looking far enough? Are they retiring? Are they just end of life in a way in that sector?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anything's wrong. I think that there's a heavy level of competition.
Mm,
Tech has been the fastest growing industry for, over a decade now in every year. Well, probably the last 40 years, but,
mm,
overall, it's orders of magnitude ahead of the world economy. Um, you look at it, and there's now 337,000 companies that have at least one managed contract.
mm,
It's not just the MSP across the street you're competing with. Every services firm, 81% of accountants, 78% of digital agencies, and every management consultant, and every, ISV, every SI, there's 20 different on a Venn diagram over my shoulder
mm,
companies that are now into managed services and trying to sell on this recurring basis because those dollars are worth more value to investors and or an exit. And 82% of customers want now
mm,
these predictable OpEx type of service agreements where they see a little bit of a predictable nature to services, which ends up driving down the price. There's a
mm,
road to zero on anything that can be commoditized. And for what we knew 25 years ago, the kind of the PSA, RMM driven managed services
mm,
is at this point a very challenging environment, to drive EBITDA north of, 16 or 17% for the average firm, which has 8 people,
mm,
with the owner principal kind of doing all the work, the finance, the sales and marketing. It's really hard as that average firm to eke out, kind of
mm,
sustainable profits out of something like that. So that's why I started this call by saying platforms.
mm,
So who's stepping out of this? And, we've got several trends underway. For example, the end of resale trend, which we've been
mm,
talking about for 43 years. But in the last couple of years, marketplaces have kind of stepped in, which digital marketplaces are growing at 86% compounded. And now they're at the range of, $45 billion, still growing at the, 40% compounded for the next 5 years. But suffice it to say, all the major marketplaces have basically told end customers that the cost of resale, the fee is 3%.
Mm.
We used to pay out margins in the 1980s of 40% and then 30% in the 1990s. And those have all been going down since then. But, to say that collecting money and all the operational costs of doing that, the risk of customer not paying, the time value of money, which with high interest rates today, net 30, net 60, net 90 is much more expensive than it was 2 years ago. And then hiring Biff to break knees, like that whole scenario, which we used to think was 40%, is now 3. So in
Unless
that
Jay, you're
modern,
Apple and you're still charging 30. How do they get away with that? I mean, it's because they're the owners of the ecosystem.
yeah, it's a high premium environment, and antitrust regulators are all over them for charging that. And it's not just 30, it's 45 if it's games and if it's newspapers.
Mm,
And the New York Times and Epic Games and others have Apple in court
mm,
over this. And so, over time, this idea of resale being the same as your credit card swipe at a restaurant, which is
mm.
3%, MasterCard or Visa, is the
Yeah.
world's going to settle on that from a consumer and business perspective. But it doesn't mean that every vendor reduces their gross to nets, their front, back end margins, the whole financial structure of how they go to market. They're not going to reduce from 20 today or 30 today, wherever they are, down to 3. But what they're going to do is pay it out on this more, what I said at the beginning,
Mm,
all the work that goes into winning the deal, whether it's early marketing or consulting, design, architecture work, and all the 28 moments are very valuable. You either win or lose a deal. You could win or lose a deal in your sleep if you don't have the partners that surround the customer. And today there's an average of 7 partners that surround every customer at a medium size or larger. And then, in a subscription model, winning the deal, the first, the kind of that winning that first payment is only the first 30 days with the customer. You got to win the deal every 30 days forever. And you got to upsell, you got to cross sell, you got to enrich that deal. Because
mm,
Wall Street today, or your private equity investors, want to see 108% renewal rate. So if you lose a customer, you got to double up your other customers to hit that rate. And so this is the new economy. And partners are saying that I'm there managing that environment every 30 days forever. Whether a customer is going to renew with you or not is basically the work that I do. The people that do the implementations, the integrations, all this work over time is whether you're going to be sticky and have a customer for life or not. So
mm,
what people are saying for that other 17% or the other 27% of your gross to nets,
mm.
start spreading that like peanut butter in a point system that says you're recognizing whether I did an ebook or a podcast like this at the beginning, or whether I'm doing that managed services every 30 days forever.
Mm.
You got to start to spread that money out like peanut butter a little bit and recognize and quantify the work that I do against your KPIs. So a more complex model, but one that makes much more sense than saying that the person who collected the money for the product, like maybe 20 or 30 years ago when you're selling, like I was, a laptop,
Mm. You get
is
the
the person that did the pre-work, did the, whatever post work. Hopefully they buy again from me in 3 or 4 years when that laptop needs to be replaced. But, this is a really different environment today. And the partners that are being successful are the ones that recognize kind of this platform economy in terms of what it's become, work with vendors who recognize the breadth and depth in terms of what they do and share in some of those economics, and start to look at the integrations. The customer is buying today 7 different things to solve a problem.
Mhm.
Where I grew up, when I was in Canada, I worked for IBM in the early 90s, where you couldn't get fired for buying IBM. One of the reasons is, maybe all the products weren't perfect and maybe they weren't all A level products. But if I shoved together 7 things, I had a company that was going to support me and I wasn't going to get fired, if something didn't work. Well, today customers are the opposite. They're going to buy 7 best of breed products, but best of breed as measured by integrations. I'll buy a product 80% as good as the next product if it works better in my environment.
Mhm.
It's like 80% of people won't buy a car today unless it has Apple CarPlay. The tech integrations are everywhere. And
Computer and
the
wheels.
7 partners that are driving those 7-layer stacks, like now there's 14 things that need to be orchestrated around every single customer outcome. And the companies who get that best and the partners who participate in those teams are the most profitable, are the most valuable. Just last Monday, we had Mission Cloud get purchased by CDW,
Mm.
who are a huge AWS partner of the year. You had Insight by ServiceNow's partner of the year. They bought Google's 7-time partner of the year. You had Presidio, who bought this year's ServiceNow partner of the year. So it seems like all the traditional resellers are investing in these partners that really get this multiplier effect. They
Mm.
don't resell ServiceNow. They don't resell Google or AWS. They actually don't sell any of it. They don't participate at the point of sale,
Mm.
but they're gaining um, business around before and after the transaction. And today, that's the most valuable thing, whether it's M&A or whether it's just
Mm.
writing out your own exit plan, your valuation.
Yeah, they definitely figured out the sweet spot. Look, I mean,
Yeah.
so if the Wall Street folks are thinking they need 108% growth, right? Do you see that these vendors saying, wait a minute, do we share the other 27% or do we sort of absorb some? Seems to me some of them may be thinking, especially if there are some bean counters there, why don't we keep this? Why do we have to share this? Maybe share a lot less. What are you seeing from the back end? Are you seeing them really ready to share, or maybe they just share, I don't know, 10%? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, there was a time where Canalys, which is Latin for channel,
Mm.
was very much on the program building. So when you have this gold, silver, bronze program and all the deal registrations and all the stuff you had to put into it, there's about 100 elements that go into the average program. Today we find ourselves much more in front of the board and in front of CFOs. Let's talk about these gross to nets, but it's not our own company living in their own um, vacuum. It's our industry. We're participating, for example, in cyber.
Mm.
This year, 87 billion, going into the 90s next year, again, growing double digits. We play with 6,500 potential competitors, but 6,500 potential partners in this space. And now in the platform economy, we got to play really well with the Palo Altos and Cisco Splunks and Microsoft Securities and CrowdStrikes of the world, as they play out more of a platform model. But the conversation isn't one that, hey, can we save a nickel here and
Mm.
go and show our investors that, hey, we're this much more profitable because of this? The answer is no. Over time, the only way to succeed in a platform model is to make sure that you're revenue sharing, you're expansive enough to work alongside 6 other companies that are going to be put into a zero trust or a SASE type of
Mm.
stack. And so, yes, I would say that there isn't a rush among CFOs to say, "Hey, I can pull a fast one here, and for a couple of
But
quarters, get a little boost to my stock price." For those looking longer term, it's like, oh my goodness, I'm going to have to look more like Microsoft or AWS or any of the trillion-dollar companies out there, which are all in platform companies.
well, looks like they're getting smarter and not looking at the short-term gain, which is great. Great news again for the channel because there's a lot of money that is there if they
Yeah.
figure out a way to kind of like bake in all the other auxiliary services and all that
By
stuff.
the way, if they want to be more profitable, just raise your price. During COVID, many vendors, had significant price increases. Many of them doubled their prices.
Mm.
So taking, advantage of inflationary times, which this is the kind of first inflationary period we've had in a really long time. Um, most vendors did take advantage and,
Sure.
drove profitability through higher pricing,
Mm.
which even with 20 or 30% margins, obviously drove much more to the bottom line. And we've had over 500,000 layoffs in the tech industry.
Mm.
So
But still,
driving
with all
costs out
the
the bottom and higher prices out the top. If you look across the industry, vendors, even distributors and the biggest partners at their public results,
Mm.
profitability is going through the roof because of these changes.
So Jay, so I get it. Everybody is increasing their prices. You just got to look at food prices. You could look at hotel prices. You could look at travel. I mean, every industry is saying, "Hey, let's roll with the team, right?" And
Yeah.
increase our pricing. Yet we have these layoffs. Um, Again, it is not counterproductive. Why the layoffs if they're making that much more money?
We live in a capitalist world. And layoffs are an interesting thing, and they're also viral.
Mm,
So, you never want to be the first of your competitive set to announce a layoff. Because guess what? Every salesperson surrounds like a, blood in the water,
mm,
and they're ready to call every customer with FUD, fear,
mm,
uncertainty, doubt. Hey, do you see my competitor just laid off 1,000 people? They're flushing down the toilet. You got to move your business. You don't want to be when they go bankrupt. You don't want to be stuck with them, and so you never want to be first.
no,
But the second that the biggest companies in the world, the biggest trillion-dollar valued companies in the world, started laying off tens of thousands of people. And by the way, during COVID, they doubled or tripled the size of the company. So all the layoffs I just mentioned didn't even take us down to, mid-COVID times.
mm,
So they, while they hired 200,000 people, they laid off 80,000 of them.
mm.
So it was easy for them, and it's unfortunate because many of the 80,000 were expensive, longer term employees, more older employees,
Yeah.
and it allowed them to again redo their financials. And now AI is going to create a whole other generation of attacking kind of human resources as a way to continue to cost money. And if you want to fuel AI investments, the CFO is probably going to counter that with human resource savings. So again, we're going like sustainability. This is actually going in the wrong direction,
Mm,
and where all of us are going to be gainfully employed and things like that. The people with skills, of course, will be.
mm,
But when a company has hundreds of thousands of people,
mm.
it's always pockets of productivity that can be, regardless of how good the people are.
Yeah.
There's entire divisions and departments that can be cut.
I get the capitalist thing. I see it. We see it everywhere. You know, food companies are a great example, right? They're increasing prices, yet they're making even more money than they ever were. So it's sort of like it's the wrong argument, because of inflation, I'm going to increase pricing yet, but it's the people that need it the most. For example, I mean, airlines now apparently they're charging in our world, for carry-on, right? And there's a big argument going on right now because how do you charge someone for a carry-on? Like, what are we going to start doing? Like wearing the clothes on top of us? I've seen it on YouTube where people are putting on all their clothes now. I'm just like, where are we going? Shouldn't we just, tap on the brakes a bit and go, hey guys, let's, it's not going to kill us to keep those people a little bit longer and do a little bit better.
Well,
Um,
there's no breaks. So
None
I think the airline
whatsoever.
industry obviously had a very tough time during COVID,
Mm,
and the profits that they're generating, the increases they're generating now, are kind of back paying those profits,
mm.
getting back to. I mean, you still have Spirit Airlines a couple of weeks ago going bankrupt, so there's still pressures in that industry as well. But I'll say that there's no you and I sitting around going, "Hey guys," that stops anything. There are
Yeah.
pressures, economic pressures of supply and demand, of what thresholds are and what the industries will be able to extract from their consumers as a percentage of their overall kind of
Wallet.
monetary. These are things that are economic from thousands of years.
Yeah.
The tech industry is going to continue to ask for more and more and more of each of our monthly budgets,
Mm.
and convince us that, hey, we don't need to travel because you can go in virtual reality and walk around there, and you don't have to be on a flight delay and like me being on an airplane for 30 hours. I mean, whatever industry it's in, there's always the kind of the tech angle that's going to say, hey, it doesn't have to be as bad as it was before. Just spend more money on tech.
Won't buy that ticket. Let's talk a bit about AI a little bit. Obviously, AI is just at its infancy still, and it's just kind of like everywhere in every product, and everybody's sort of using it. Some people are, playing a game that they've got AI, but in reality, there's lots of variation flavors, if you will, like Baskin Robbins. I think there's a lot more flavors of AI today. Where do you see, the channel in particular? I know vendors are using AI to make it more efficient, and particularly in cyber, they're reducing the noise, the footprint of all the different red flags as they call it, and trying to figure out how to make it more efficient, do more with less, that type of thing. Where do you see as the opportunity for the channel partners in AI? Is it just we just gonna accept the fact that all these solutions are going to have AI, and do we make money from it, or we just simply, use the solutions that's already got AI baked in?
Yeah, well, let's start at the very top. Let's go through the numbers at the very top. We are, I fully believe, in the next 20-year cycle. Client server took us from the 80 to 2000. SaaS and then infrastructure as a service took us from 2000 to 2020, kind of where we were last March.
Yeah.
And now we've triggered a new 20-year cycle. If you go talk to, Satya at Microsoft, he will say they see a 4 trillion with a T dollar market TAM. And when they include the ecosystem around Microsoft, the $8.45 that can be made for every Microsoft dollar, he sees it as closer to $6 trillion TAM. You go to Sam Altman from OpenAI, he sees a $7 trillion build out, NVIDIA chips, and this why NVIDIA became the biggest company in the world, a month ago. So these are big numbers because the world economy is 105 trillion. So these are numbers that are at, 5-6% of world GDP in near-term TAM that these, big companies are seeing. So when we're talking in those trillions of dollars, if you talk to the channel, we have an outlook that goes till 2028 that has $158 billion in services. But the way to think about AI is the consumer trend, which triggered last March, was important. It writes poetry, music, pictures. It's dazzling people with deep fakes and stuff like this. This was a really important consumer trend to trigger business, to have consumers open to having a co-pilot, open to having intelligence on their smartphone and buying edge devices that have this. It was a huge almost funding model. It was better than any Super Bowl ad could have been because we all got spooked at that point, and all of our neighbors, friends, and family who are not tech people ran to us as tech people and said, did we just light up Skynet? Like, is this, Arnold Schwarzenegger is going to come back? This is literally the machines are going to take over, and this is done. We just flipped the switch. I mentioned working at IBM. I was there in '96 when we played Gary Kasparov, the grand champion of chess, grandmaster of chess. First time a computer ever defeated a chess. That was AI, but it was brute force. It was the way to play the game all the way through and then backwards, trillions of variations, and always choose the next move. There's no way a human can beat that. A few years later, Google defeated Go. It's just proven that every game that's computational, computers will always win. But then it beat Jeopardy in 2011. This was a generative AI because it was brute force to get to the answer within the trillions of a second that you have to press the button. But then you had to think up the answer in the form of a question. And that was that was kind of communication, and that was generative AI. But that was 13 years ago. So AI has been on a 30-year mission here, but it's now core to the consumer trend. And the second part of it, which we kind of broke into 4 categories, there's going to be all the business-related planning projects, services around consulting, really the system integrators kind of getting in at the beginning, talking to Air Canada, talking to American Airlines and the Bank of America, and kind of playing all these out in terms of what marketing projects you're going to do, what CX chatbot projects you're going to do. And so we saw, a big window there first. Second is the 250,000 SaaS companies today are lined up adding feature sets. So every conference you go to now, they're showing out their AI features. Every product we use has a little button that says, AI on it. Every, things in our car and our toothbrushes. This is the whole build out, but there's not a lot of partner opportunity in that. Like, you could educate people how to click that button and what the output is going to be, and maybe it's going to hallucinate and what processes you're going to need. But the whole idea that we're going to sell that button for $5, like a Copilot or an Einstein GPT, has gone away. Now, agent AI is more of this per chat or per click or per picture type of costing model. We'll get into that in a minute. But this whole world lifts when every product we use has features built in, and AI is a feature. It's not a product. Now you get into third, which is now the promise of AI. Bill Gates said that we overestimate what we're going to do in 2 years, and we end up underestimating what we're going to do in 10. He said that in 1996, and we've done it over and over and over again. It happened with SaaS, it happened with cloud, it's happened with mobility, it's happened everywhere. We always get too excited at the beginning. And as we get into March 2025, we hit that 2-year mark, and it was absolutely underwhelming. All of the big GSIs, the Accentures and Deloittes and CAP and KPMGs and EYs have been disappointed, and publicly disappointed because they're public companies, with almost no growth. And they were staffing up tens of thousands of people, getting them certified at all the big AI, Anthropic and Gemini and ChatGPT. And they've struggled to find early adopters. One of the cooling things of the world, by the way, came in Canada. Air Canada losing that court case right up to the Supreme Court. But that chatbot, with that bereavement fee, chilled the rest of the world, by the way. Because up until now, Air Canada could always defend itself to say it was a tech glitch. All the prices on the internet go down to $1, and everybody buys a flight at $1. They don't have to stand up to that and support it because it was a tech glitch. And the courts agreed with them. Yes, if nobody would have a reasonable assumption that you could fly anywhere for $1. Well, they did that same defense in Canada to say, hey, our chatbot hallucinated. We don't have that bereavement option. That $800 commitment, we don't have to stand behind because it was a glitch. And the courts ended up saying, well, no, it's not a glitch. You trained and tuned that model. You are in charge of the guardrails. Much like a call center agent also hallucinating, your chatbot is your responsibility. So the rest of the world, by the way, chilled based on that Air Canada case to say, oh, responsibility might be different here. I don't want to be an early adopter. Call me back when I can be an early majority, when everybody else is doing it. So that's the third part of this, which is the what we'll call is that 83% of the world's business data. When our relationships change with our airline, with our bank, with our government, et cetera, there's a whole data lake, the Snowflake, Datadog, Databrick, MongoDB layer. That we're not going to do the data lake on the old IBM mainframe that was plugged in the 1970s. But we're going to extract that data at the edge and do the work there. We're not going to forklift all that data into the public clouds. As we talked about earlier, they're full. Not enough electricity, not enough space, not enough water to go do that. All the CEOs of the big public clouds have said, no, the work is going to be done at the edge. So over the next 8 years, any work that's done at the edge is a huge partner opportunity. It needs to drive the compute, storage, networking, needs to drive the managed services. This is going to be really good for us, that the topology says that the edge. But we're underwhelmed in the first 2 years, but I think we're going to be overwhelmed by year 10 as every company in the world looks to create that different relationship with their buyers. That's number 3. And then number 4 is just the increases. So we're going through 6 quarters of double-digit growth in PCs, for example. Not just because of AI. We have the cycle that started in COVID. We all went home with laptops. Those machines are over 3 years old now. Microsoft announced the end of Windows support next October, which is always an enterprise cycle. So that's a dual. And now triple, which is Gen AI. You can't buy a $500 hunk of plastic to run AI at the edge. Like NVIDIA is going to build chips for PCs next year. So you're going to be doing more and more on the edge, more and more on your smartphone, more and more on all the devices you have around your home and business. So this whole idea of a topology is going to really support the edge around where partners exist. And if they're selling, double-digit growth in devices, if they're getting double-digit growth, today triple-digit growth on the server side, and networking and other pieces, and then all the managed services that go around that. I mean, it's going to be a really good 8-year play out at the edge. And this is why we're so bullish on this industry and obviously the partners themselves playing it out. It's just not going to be played the same way. You're not going to resell with margin all this stuff, but you're going to wrap every moment before and after that transaction and charge the customers, the going rate, and really build out your businesses that way.
It just seems as well. I think you're this makes so much sense because I think it's for the first time, Jay, correct me if I'm wrong here, that it used to be where software was always ahead of the hardware. It would always smack the hardware down. Oh, you slow, you got to get a brand new set of hardware, got to get more power type thing. And now it seems like hardware is taking a bit of a quantum leap, a jump ahead with AI powered hardware where the power is there and the software needs to catch up. It You need more powerful software. So things sort of flipped a bit now. So we should see amazing software, I believe, because now the hardware it has really hyper leaped, if you will. What
Yep.
do you think?
And it's gonna go together. You're right. Like when I was selling PCs in the 90s, we looked for every new game because
Mm,
the game that pushed your hardware to the limit meant that
yeah,
that 3-year-old PC wouldn't
yeah,
run the new game. You'd switch it out. On business side, when Microsoft would come out with the new Office and it slowed down your Pentium PC to a crawl, there you go. You'd have to go buy a new i5 or i7 PC. So those were the days. And now you're right. It's not as much hardware and software, it's the models.
mm,
It's how much of the model will run at the edge. So, think about Alexa, in your kitchen and, around your house. How many trillions of questions do they get per hour? And then just a quick data play is, I asked about last night's football game. I'm asking about the weather. The 80-20 rule really surfaces quickly
mm,
around how much of the pressure on those data centers that they have to run, like Alexa has to run everything over the wire. It can't even answer basic questions other than setting maybe a timer for your kitchen.
mm,
Basically, everything goes over the wire. And what Apple is thinking, what Microsoft's thinking, what Amazon's thinking, whatever Google's thinking, is pushing 80% of that activity to the edge. So the model that we have on these old hunks of plastic and now new hunks of plastic, need to run 80% of those queries without going across the wire and going tapping into. And if you ask something complicated, explain to me again what happened in 1776 and Paul Revere, that's going to be the 866% chat GPT thing that goes and runs in a public data center. But everything else, you're moving through your daily life and they're reading your calendar and they're co-piloting. So they're reading your emails. They're already thinking ahead of what questions you're going to be asking. That birthday party you need to go to tonight, it already knows where it is and it already knows you're going to be asking the GPS to plug it into your car. So these are the things that will happen. But everything that happens towards the edge is going to benefit the channel.
mm. Interesting. In our worlds, we're at some point, right? We may not even need to get out of the house. Jay. We're just going to have our
We're going to
digital
be in a
twin.
vegetable state. My
Yeah.
co-pilot is going to have a podcast with your co-pilot. And
Yes.
that's
Talk to
where
my
we are. We're just
co-pilot, and we'll do something. I'll wrap this up with some of your predictions for what you think the channel folks and the vendors should be thinking about for 2025. What's coming?
Yeah, so I mean, we've kind of crossed a
Yeah,
number
we
of different things, but again, an industry that we have growing north of 8% into 2025. But in most places, like I said, at the edge where partners are, there's no reason you shouldn't be planning for double-digit growth. And certain partner types, and again, this platform flywheel and this spinning economy and the new buyer that we have by the end of this year, this digital first economy, making sure you're making money in digital marketplace deals, making sure that you're aligned yourself to the technologies that are taking us forward and getting your fair share out of your current clients' investment, would say that some partners are going to be planning for triple digit growth over the next number of years. If you choose right, if you build the right skills, some people are thinking of M&A, ways they
Mm,
could come together. 1 + 1 could equal 3, and how to put it together. So again, this is kind of standing from a platform of opportunity
mm,
looking forward. There should be no reason, in terms of customer demand or inflation, interest rates. We've got through the elections that were troubling this year. We're
Mm.
going to continue to go through climate issues, and we're not going to be able to change it. So you don't work on things you can't change. You focus on the things you can. And to every one of your listeners, I think this is going to be a really, really good year in 2025. Again, hardware, software, and the services that surround it. Services are growing faster than hardware and software.
Mm.
So whichever, growth your vendors happen to be planning for themselves, you should be thinking about growing faster because that's what customers are spending is more on that. So that's the kind of market that I would be thinking about. And I would just double click over maybe the holiday season. I would look at the pie chart again. Look inside the hardware. There's about $1 trillion of hardware
Mm.
next year. There's about $1 trillion in software, and there's $3 trillion in services. So I just want to make sure that I'm aligning myself. Like the trains are on the tracks, they're leaving the station, they're picking up speed. I just want to hang my caboose on the
Mm.
right ones and be able to draft or multiply some of those numbers. And there's no reason not to build a business that can do 30, 40, 50%, kind
Yeah.
of average growth next year.
There you go. I mean, it used to be the story was all about the software. And I just think this year moving forward is a lot to do with the hardware now. And for the first time, it's exciting. I mean, it's amazing when you use an AI powered laptop and you go, wow, that lasts a long time and it's pretty cool.
Do you remember that blog that came out, Software is Eating the World?
Yes.
That was like back in Anderson and stuff like that. And this
Yeah.
whole idea that SaaS industry was going to take over the world. Well,
Yeah.
here's a good stat for your next cocktail party. All the 250,000 SaaS companies, Salesforce, HubSpot, ServiceNow, Workday, etc., managed services is 1.5 times larger.
Mm.
For all the things we talk about, the hyperscalers, not just the top three, but getting into Alibaba and getting down to Oracle
Yeah.
and IBM and everybody else, all the hyperscalers. Do you know that managed services is 1.5 times larger than them combined?
So
This
managed
sounds
services are going to eat the world now.
so managed services might eat the world, but the right answer though is software runs on hardware.
Yeah.
And whether you're thinking Internet of Things, AI, automation, blockchain, quantum computing, self-driving cars, drones, 3D printers, metaverse, whatever future you envision with your clients, there is a ton of hardware that goes into every one of these. Needs to be managed, needs to be installed, needs to be integrated, needs to have all the pieces around it that we know how to do. The
Mm.
software needs it too. And that's why services are outgrowing our vendors today.
Makes sense. Well, it used to feel like the dream was a dream of that could happen. Now it just feels like we are in the dream and things are happening. The hardware, the power is sort of like come together at the right moment to make software, much more effective. And if we can maintain the sustainability aspect, maybe we can all have a really good future. Jay, I'll leave you with the last word, my friend. What do you want everybody to know what's happening at Jay and Canalys?
Oh, we're just busy as heck. Again, we got acquired, and actually last
Yeah.
week we formed a new company under the Nasdaq. So in the kind of third-party data world of Google and Facebook selling all our private data,
Hmm.
one part of all these elections is that's going away.
Hmm.
The cookies and all that stuff that have driven the internet for 25 years is going away, and companies like ours are forming.
Hmm.
That you might go to an event, you might listen to an analyst like me with research, you might read a magazine, all the 28 moments before you buy a car, before you buy a piece of software, is going to go through second party data. And not only you, but partners of yours and vendors, you're all going to share in these 28 moments. The more you share with each other in terms of data, is the earlier you see the deal. When you see a deal early, you win it. So the whole measurements and metrics of how this kind of world runs. And when we speak to Alexa and 5 minutes later, Facebook services an ad for us on that same thing, when those days go away, it's going to be much more close and intimate with the customer. And we just got to figure out who the other six partners are in a particular deal that influence that particular customer. We've got to figure out the bigger 14 different points around it. And when that happens, I think we're all growing much faster in the future. And those trillions of dollars that were created in the old world, slowly start to trickle to us in the future.
Pick your friends and partners wisely, I guess. Jay,
Data's the new oil, right?
there you go. Take care, Jay. Have a happy holidays, Merry Christmas, and enjoy the rest of the year. And let's see what happens in 2025. Cheers.
All right. Cheers.
All right.